Hi, my name is Josh. You can find me on Twitter at FYFJosh, and today I am tiering the top wide receivers for the 2022 fantasy football season. Also, if you like what you see here, like the video and go ahead and hit that subscribe button for Front Yard Fantasy. We will continue to put out great fantasy football and dynasty content throughout the offseason. So, I have 5 tiers that the top 36 wide receivers will fall into. This is a PPR league going into the 2022 NFL season. Just to give you a brief description of each tier, we have the elites. These wide receivers have elite production almost every week. They have safe floors and very high ceilings, and you feel confident that they provide you an advantage over other rosters and wide receivers. The second tier is the borderline elites. You're absolutely starting these wide receivers in your fantasy lineups every week, and they are difference makers at the wide receiver position. However, they just don't quite make it into the elite tier. The elite tier guys do separate themselves, but they're almost there. One or two things go their way, and they can be right there into the elite tier. The third tier is the wide receiver ones. These are guys that are going to be drafted very high. They are going to be weekly starters regardless of matchup, but they certainly have some question marks that keep them from being elite. The fourth tier are the wide receiver twos. These are wide receivers that you'll be able to throw into your lineup every week, but they have some serious concerns, whether it's their quarterback situation, competition around them, or maybe just a disappointing 2021 season. If everything goes right, these guys absolutely have elite tier upside. Then we have the wide receiver threes. These are wide receivers that still have a lot more to show on the football field before they can actually move up tiers, in my opinion, for next season. I like having these guys in my fantasy teams, but I'm not so sure I feel confident or comfortable starting them every week in fantasy. All right, so without further ado, let's just get in there. And we are going to start with the elite tier. And the first person we are going to put into the elite tier is Cooper Kupp. This might not surprise you. Cooper Kupp just had one of the best fantasy seasons we have ever seen from a wide receiver. He had 25.9 fantasy points per game in a PPR league. Like I said, maybe the best wide receiver season we've ever seen for fantasy football. The second person we're going to put into the elite tier, and the last person we're going to put in here, is Davante Adams, actually. Now, this is assuming that he's playing with Aaron Rodgers next season, and I don't even care if they're in Green Bay or not. If Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams are paired up, they're elites, and these are the two elite guys, in my opinion. So we're going to move on to the next tier. These are the borderline elites. These are the guys that are almost there, but they have some question marks. And the first guy I'm going to put into the borderline elite tier, and he's a guy I almost put into the elite tier, but I just couldn't quite do it, is Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel, he scored 21.2 fantasy points per game this past season, and he looked great doing it. He's still in the playoffs right now, and he's running the football. But this guy does have a lengthy injury past. And really, we've only seen him have this elite production for one season. I know we've only seen that really with Cooper Kupp, but Cooper Kupp really, he set the bar pretty high there, paired up with Matthew Stafford. So Deebo Samuel's the closest to the elite tier for me. The next person we're going to put into the borderline elite tier is Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson is the next person we're putting in here. He just had a fantastic season, 19.4 fantasy points per game. He's so close to being elite. He's elite for dynasty purposes, but going into next season, I'm still definitely drafting Cooper Kupp and Davante Adams over him. And a guy you're going to see next to Justin Jefferson's name, probably for years to come at this point, is Ja'Marr Chase. Ja'Marr Chase just had such a dominant rookie season. He looked incredible. He's paired with Joe Burrow for the foreseeable future, but he also has other people to compete with on the same team with T. Higgins. So that kind of separates him from being elite. It separates him from Davante Adams and Cooper Kupp, in my opinion. The next person we're going to put into the borderline elite tier, and someone who's been in the elite tier himself in the past, is Tyreek Hill. This past fantasy season, he only had 17.4 fantasy points per game, but he's still a borderline elite guy. He's still paired with Patrick Mahomes. He still has elite athleticism, but we just didn't quite see it this season. And I'm hoping this isn't a downtrend for Tyreek Hill. He's still a borderline elite, and he could find his way into the elite tier before the season ends next year. And the last guy we're going to put into the borderline elite tier is Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs, he had the least fantasy points per game out of all the guys we talked about so far with 16.8, but he's paired with Josh Allen, who looks fantastic. I could see Stefon Diggs having an even better season next year. These are the borderline elite guys. We're going to move on to the next tier. The next tier are the wide receiver ones. And the first person we're going to put into the wide receiver one category is Keenan Allen, paired with Justin Herbert. I love Keenan Allen. He's getting a little bit older now, 16.1 fantasy points per game last year. You cannot complain about this. This guy can catch everything thrown his way. I love Keenan Allen going into next season. Who we're going to put in here after Keenan Allen is actually A.J. Brown. Now, this is a run-first offense, but A.J. Brown he's an elite talent. hands down. He does have a little bit of an injury concern, but if everything goes his way, I could easily see him being in the elite category. The only thing holding him back again is this offense and the run first, and their run first ideology, right? And AJ Brown, however, only had 13.9 fantasy points per game last year. That's not great, especially comparing him with this other guys, but I think his upside's there. The next guy I'm going to put into the wide receiver ones is Mike Evans. It looks like Chris Godwin could be out of there. He might not be with Tampa Bay next season. As long as Tom Brady's there, Mike Evans is absolutely a wide receiver one and belongs in this tier. I considered putting him in the borderline elites, especially if Chris Godwin's not going to be there. Can't quite do that yet, which wish he just got more catches throughout the season. He's more of a big play guy. He did have 16.4 fantasy points per game. That's going to be the highest out of all the wide receivers we have in this tier. So I really like Mike Evans going in next season. After Mike Evans, we're going to put DK Metcalf. And some people were disappointed with how DK Metcalf's seasons went. He had 14.4 fantasy points per game. That's pretty good. And he's a big play threat himself, but he's so uber athletic. I love watching this guy play. As long as Russell Wilson's there next year, DK Metcalf belongs here. After DK Metcalf, someone that's been in the elite tier before, DeAndre Hopkins. He had a pretty disappointing season, kind of riddled with injuries. He wasn't seeing as many catches as he saw in the past. That offense, the Cardinals offense does like to spread the ball around. But DeAndre Hopkins, he has elite talent, and I expect a much better season next year, especially after seeing the Cardinals offense this past week where it was kind of abysmal. They really need DeAndre Hopkins back. The guy I'm going to put in after DeAndre Hopkins is CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb, I do think, belongs in the wide receiver one category. Now, I understand people were disappointed with this season. He kind of ended the year poorly, but he has so much talent. He's paired with Dak Prescott. I still like CeeDee Lamb a lot going into next season. And the last person we're going to put into the wide receiver one category here, and it might surprise a lot of people, but it's Jaylen Waddle. I loved what I saw out of him his rookie season. He scored 15.4 fantasy points per game. That's higher than AJ Brown. That's higher than DK Metcalf, higher than CeeDee Lamb, higher than DeAndre Hopkins in his rookie season. Uber impressive. The Dolphins are going to try to get the ball in his hand a ton going into next season. So that wraps up the wide receiver ones. We are going to move on to the wide receiver twos. And the first person I'm going to put into the wide receiver two category, and again, this one might be surprising for some people, Diontae Johnson scoring 17.2 fantasy points per game this past season. That's higher than everyone in the wide receiver one category. However, he's not going to be with Ben Roethlisberger next season. And I get it. Ben Roethlisberger, he looked really bad, but he loved throwing the ball to Diontae Johnson. I still really like Diontae Johnson. He's probably the closest that's going to be in this next year that's closest to wide receiver ones, but I'm terrified about what the Steelers offense is going to look like next season. Big Ben, again, he couldn't throw the deep ball, but he knew how to throw an accurate ball short, especially to Diontae Johnson. The next person we're going to put in here is DJ Moore. DJ Moore had a pretty disappointing season in a lot of people's eyes, but 14 fantasy points per game isn't bad. I don't know who the quarterback's going to be for Carolina, but DJ Moore has the talent to overcome a bad situation. I still think he belongs in this year. A person who had a very similar season to DJ Moore that I'm going to talk about next year is Terry McLaurin. Disappointing season. Not a very good quarterback situation. We don't know what that's going to look like next season. Terry McLaurin had only 12.6 fantasy points per game. This was a very disappointing season for him, but I think the talent is still there. He belongs in this tier. The next person we're going to put in this tier is Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin, he tore his ACL, and he is a free agent this upcoming offseason. Now, if he signs with the Bucs again, he might be in the borderline elite tier, actually. He had 17.3 fantasy points per game. He looked fantastic. But again, that torn ACL really, really hurts things here. And it's going to lower him. And if he's with a bad team next season, this is more where he belongs. After Chris Godwin, we're going to put in Calvin Ridley. And, Calvin Ridley, he took some time off from the NFL. It looks like he doesn't want to be with Atlanta next season. But he did have 14.2 fantasy points per game this season, which is not bad. I think Calvin Ridley has great borderline elite talent at the wide receiver position. So regardless of the team he's with, he probably belongs right here in the wide receiver two category with all the question marks. After Calvin Ridley, we are going to put in T. Higgins. T. Higgins, the teammate of Jamar Chase, who was in the borderline elite tier. T. Higgins had a really good season. He scored 15.6 fantasy points per game, but I do project him as the number 2 wide receiver on this offense behind Jamar Chase. He's going to have some big weeks, but like we just saw in this last playoff game he played, Wild Card Weekend, he's going to disappear at times, finding him right here in the wide receiver 2 category. After T. Higgins, we are going to put in Michael Pittman Jr. I loved what I saw out of Michael Pittman Jr. his second season. He is the wide receiver 1 for the Colts. I hope Carson Wentz is the quarterback for them next year. They are a run-first offense. Michael Pittman had 14 fantasy points per game this season. This is somewhat of a breakout season for me. He really impressed me. And the last person we're going to put in the wide receiver 2s is Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper is going to find his way into the back end of the wide receiver 2s for me, 13.5 fantasy points per game. But he's paired with Dak Prescott. I still think CeeDee Lamb's the wide receiver 1 on that team, but they kind of share that role where they're a 1A, 1B kind of situation. So moving on to the wide receiver 3s, and the first player I want to talk about in the wide receiver 3s is Tyler Lockett. He was maybe my most difficult decision out of all the players I had to rank between making him a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3. I did end up putting him at the top end of the wide receiver 3s, however, 15.1 fantasy points per game. Lockett was one of the tougher decisions, like I said. He'll be 30 next season, and I do expect a better season for DK Metcalf. So those are some negatives for Tyler Lockett. He's also very boomer bust. Certainly a guy you want, but I just couldn't put him in with the guys above him. Who we're going to put in here after Tyler Lockett is Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas, and say what you will, he did not play in the 2021 season. I get it. He's had some injuries the last couple of years, but we saw one of the best wide receiver seasons we've ever seen in the NFL back in 2019. I know he was with Drew Brees then, but I think Michael Thomas will be back healthy next season, and he'll have decent production, regardless if he's with the Saints or not, but it's absolutely a risk, which is why he's here in the wide receiver 3 category. After Michael Thomas, we're going to put Devonta Smith. From a talent standpoint, I think the talent's absolutely there. It's just really, I'm nervous about the offense. They want to be a run-first offense. Jalen Hurts runs the ball a lot as well. Devonta Smith, this was his rookie season. He only had 10.9 fantasy points per game, but the talent's absolutely there, like I keep saying. I'm going to be drafting him. I think he's going to be a value in most drafts going into 2022. After Devonta Smith, we are going to put in Darnell Mooney. I loved what I saw out of Darnell Mooney this season, 12.9 fantasy points per game in a pretty bad offense all around. Man, this guy was open so often, and if they were just able to have a quarterback that could hit him on these deep routes, Darnell Mooney would have had a fantastic, maybe a top 10 season this year. Yeah, I'm saying top 10 season. This guy's super athletic. He's just on a bad offense. I really like Darnell Mooney's talent. After Darnell Mooney, we're going to put in Marquise Brown, and Marquise Brown kind of ended the season disappointingly, but he didn't have one of his best friends, Lamar Jackson. And I'm not making that up. Lamar Jackson and Marquise Brown are literally kind of best friends. They hang out. So when he was paired with Lamar Jackson, Marquise Brown was a top 15 wide receiver production wise over the course of the season, and 14.1 fantasy points per game. I know there are concerns about Rashad Bateman taking on more of a role, but I love Marquise Brown. After Marquise Brown, we're going to put in another rookie, Elijah Moore. Again, it's really just concerns about the offense, the talent's there, but Elijah Moore had 12.6 fantasy points per game for the Jets. After Elijah Moore, we are going to put in Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 13.4 fantasy points per game over the course of the season, but we all know those last 5 games were fantastic. I really want to see how he produces with TJ Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift both back in the lineup. And I think they got to add other pass catchers for that team. So I like Amon-Ra St. Brown's talent, but he's a wide receiver 3 for me. After Amon-Ra St. Brown, we're going to put in Hunter Renfrow, just a PPR machine over the course of the season. He played a lot of the season without Darren Waller, though, but even with Darren Waller back the last couple of weeks, Hunter Renfrow played well, 15.2 fantasy points per game. I really like Hunter Renfrow. After Hunter Renfrow, we're going to do Brandon Ayuk here. Brandon Ayuk had 10 fantasy points per game. He looked like he was left for dead at the beginning of the season, but he actually got some of that role he had last season back. Deebo Samuel plays a lot of running back, so Brandon Ayuk's going to be involved next season. After Brandon Ayuk, we're going to put Brandon Cooks. I actually really like what I've seen out of Davis Mills, and Brandon Cooks just produces 14.5 fantasy points per game this last season. He's going to be underrated going into next season. Brandon Cooks is going to be a good value. Much like Brandon Cooks, good value, Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen's touchdowns, 15.4 fantasy points per game, dealt with an injury throughout the end of this season, but again, he's a wide receiver 3 going into 2022. After Adam Thielen, I'm going to put Allen Robinson. You guys might not like this because of how disappointing he actually was this season. Only 7.2 fantasy points per game, but he's going to be a free agent this offseason. He needs to get out from underneath the Bears. And if you pair him with a decent quarterback, I think Allen Robinson has a bounce back year. After Allen Robinson, we're going to put Odell Beckham. No longer with the Browns. He is now with the Ravens. But I mean, the Ravens. He's now with the Rams. But I love the chemistry that I've seen Odell build with Matthew Stafford. As long as Odell is on the Rams, I am excited about his fantasy production. And the last person we're going to put in here, the 36 overall wide receiver for me, is Mike Williams. 15.4 fantasy points per game. He kind of teased us with awesome production at the beginning of the year and was pretty disappointing to end the season. But he will be a free agent himself this offseason. Honestly, I hope he stays with the Chargers. I think that's the best case for his fantasy value, but maybe he finds his way onto a team where he's the alpha number one wide receiver, and that's a good situation for him as well. So he's got a lot of upside to himself. So these are my top 36 wide receivers put into tiers. I hope you liked the video. Have a great day.